Xavier, welcome to the Smile podcast. It's fantastic to have you here on and exciting to be talking today more about Atome and yourself. Xavier, as a quick intro, has over 10 plus years experience in regional partnerships and specifically in financial services. He's previously been with Visa, with Grab, Binance. He's based in Singapore and welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you on. First question that I would have is amazing after so many stints in different platforms in fintech. What does it take to be, a business development manager, and what is a business development manager in such a context? Maybe you can give the audience a little bit of an intro.
Yeah, I think first of all, happy Friday, Jerome. Thank you so much for inviting me to our podcast today. Really appreciate that and excited to, share so much more about what we have for our audience today, right? And I think first of all, the payments industry is so small, but yet at the same time so interesting. You mentioned 10 years. Wow, 10 years has been a long time. And, back then I was still using cash to make my payments, and look at how we have come so far, right? We have started using, PayWave. We have this QR code to scan for payments, and even now, what Atome doing is, the buy now pay later concept, where users are able to, work on all these kind of, different payment methods, and it just shows how much payments have evolved and innovated along the last 10 years, and there's so much more room to grow as well. And that's where I'm very, very interested and passionate about seeing how the payments industry can evolve and continue to innovate further. And in terms of business development, what we do, right, not just myself but the whole industry, is to really go out there to find different partners on how we can find each other's strengths and collaborate together on how we can develop better solutions as well as services for the industry as well as for the users. And that's where the conversation starts getting interesting, because you talk about the experience that we have coming down together, and then we think about brainstorming new ideas on how we can collaborate together, bring each other value, USP to the new market, right? And I think that's where we try to create the new value propositions for our customers.
So what I can summarize from that is passion first and foremost, and you have to be interested in the whole ecosystem, right? So you have to know what's going on left and right of your own business, and to really keep an ear on the track and of what's going on. One of the things that probably has not, slipped by your attention is, this huge advances in AI and artificial intelligence in the last 12 months. And we had the emergence of OpenAI. Google has come up with a similar product, and you see gradually, changing this industry of fintech. How would you say it had an effect on your company? But is it particularly for Atome? Has there been an impact on that, or?
That shows how far thinking that we have, right, using AI, right, artificial intelligence, to kind of like propel all these kind of innovations, where we have Atome right now on the consumer facing side. And you're right. I think over the last 1 or 2 years, we've seen the rise of AI, the technology that it bring about, and how it can actually help all the different kind of businesses in terms of the kind of like value that they bring about. And particularly, I think for Atome, right, we are working with so many different kind of data set in terms of risk management, risk assessment for our users, right? And that's where AI comes in to really help us in a lot of ways, where we can kind of like process the different kind of data sets that used to qualify and also understand a customer risk profile at various stages of their relationship with us, right? For example, when they start their onboarding process, doing their KYC verification, or when they are coming to Atome and asking for different kind of financial services product. And actually what's not known, or what users do not experience, that a lot of this work at the back end, right? We actually uses quite a lot of this kind of AI value and technology in order for us to process and do the different kind of algorithms that we have, so that we can better qualify our users and make sure that they receive the best kind of services as well as product from our financial offerings.
I understand that a lot of people that are listening to this podcast already know what Atome is, but for those who don't, or for basically just anyone, how would you introduce them? I mean, the company, we know you guys do BNPL, and you have an app, and you have you launch cards, etc. But what is how would you summarize it in a what's the main value proposition and what you bring to the table, especially in a market like Southeast Asia, where you know that there is so many people that are underbanked or even unbanked? What is the Atome claim to fame?
Yeah, and I think to answer this question, right, maybe I will share a fun fact, right? Maybe not a lot of people know in terms of Atome. How does this name come about, right? And how is it pronounced? And of course, we always talk about Atome, but what people don't know that what it really means, right? So Atome actually means A to me, right? And what does A stands for? It stands for available, right? So basically, that's the core kind of a principle that Atome brings to the users, which is available to me. And that's what we are trying to bring for our different users in the different markets, right? Bring the different kind of financial offerings, financial services to all these users, so that, what they are not able to access in the past is available to them now. And, that's the main kind of like objective of how Atome came about, right? A to me, available to me, right? And this is something that not known, and I wish more people would know, because I think that's very interesting in terms of branding and in terms of our mission purpose, right? Our mission statement of what we aim to deliver. And I think for this, how we came about, coming with this new product, what we call BNPL, buy now, pay later model, and trying to cater to particularly the Southeast Asia market, where you mentioned correctly, Jerome, that in emerging markets like Philippines, we see that there are very, very big segment out there in this population that's underbanked or unbanked, right? Which means they do not have the necessary access to this kind of financial products compared to the other markets like Singapore, right? And what we saw from, in terms of kind of like data statistics, that up to 70% of these markets like Philippines, right, they're unbanked, right? And the credit card penetration, right, is in the single digits. And that's where we saw a huge opportunity in terms of our value proposition on what we can bring to these users, right? And because the banks and the traditional financial services, they always evaluate risk using the traditional method, right? And that sometimes can only be even evaluated after a user open their bank accounts. But what happens to users who are not able to have a bank account in the first place, right? How do they have access to this kind of financial services? And that's where we can come in, right, in terms of our product, right? We are trying to make our financial services more accessible to them in terms of working from a different perspective of how we evaluate the risk management part, the risk assessment part. And this can be, giving them from a very small spending limit to start with, so that they are able to start using this Atome card, right? And then to try out first. And slowly over time, we can educate them in terms of the financial literacy, right? Compared to the traditional, models. And then from then on, we work with them over the user journey, right? For them to, start spending more, having good repayment behavior, building their credit, history, right? And we grow with them along every junction of their financial journey, right? So this is where we try to come in, and we try to provide a solution, or rather a value proposition, to this group of segment, and we grow with them in the market, right? As we grow together, I'm sure that, we can see excellent growth as well as partnerships with other players in the ecosystem as well.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, speaking of which, I think partnerships, when we have seen, for instance, other BNPL players, and I call them BNPL players now because you also do BNPL, but it sounds from the mission that you go far beyond. I think available to me sounds to me more like a huge financial inclusion project, much more than, and BNPL is just a part of it, right? So you launch the cards and you have the app. But since you were mentioning partnerships and BNPL in combination, what does the ecosystem look like at the moment? I think that's the perfect question to ask somebody who's in business development, right? So what do you think is a great, outlook for you, and what are some of your favorite projects right now?
Yeah, I mean, right now, we work with so many different partners just because, we are out there to find out about the new solutions or the new services that all the industry players out there are trying to, innovate and provide for the users. And by working and understanding, what's out there in the market, what's trend, right? Even talking to the local regulators, right? To understand what's the major pain point and how we can really identify them and solve it. I think that's where we are coming in from the angle, always from the user perspective. And by understanding what they're looking for, what's the pain point, we can try to craft, a unique value proposition or a solution to address these problems, right? And I think from the business development part, that's where we go in, right? To find the different kind of partnerships that we can collaborate together so that we can come together and provide, things that really matter and enhance the product for our users. And I think one of them, like what we are doing with Smile, right? Working with this strategic partnership so that we can actually get more data for the users in terms of employment data, right? For us to get more evaluation in terms of our risk management so that we can provide our users with, let's say, a better spending limit, understanding their behavior so that we can not just provide them with, for example, at the start, Atome Buy Now Pay Later, which they have to scan at the QR code to make payment. And then we evolve that into a Buy Now Pay Later card, where they have now a physical card where they can use to shop at the daily grocery store, buying their daily necessity stuff, and even shop online, right? Where we saw e-commerce over the last few years has been booming and everyone is shopping there. And without, a financial card product, it's very hard to, check out at this e-commerce site. But now with the Atome Buy Now Pay Later card, they are able to do that, right? And these are the kind of like different partnerships that we look out for. We go into the framework, always understanding what's the best for our users and what we can do together with other partners to bring this kind of well-rounded kind of services to them.
Great. So since Smile and Atome in the partnership is starting in the Philippines, but I know you guys are in many markets in Southeast Asia. Maybe you can expand a little bit of how big your reach actually is and what are some of the strategies that you have to drive financial inclusion in these markets?
Yeah, so primarily we are looking at the Southeast Asia and, working with Smile in Philippines, that's where we see a lot of potential to grow. But at the same time, in terms of other markets, we are looking at, for example, any other emerging market in Indonesia, right? That's one segment that we see very strong similarities as well in terms of how we can serve the underbanked or unbanked segment with the same kind of like product and financial services too. But at the same time, when we look at the other side of the equation, right, we have Singapore as another market, which is very different from Philippines and Indonesia, where, the financial literacy is high, the landscape is totally different. We see a very high penetration of the debit credit card segment, right? And obviously, when we go into these kind of different markets, the value proposition, the kind of services that we provide will tweak a little bit. So it really based on different markets, back to the essential framework that we have, always understanding what the market needs, what the users need. And, at the back end, we see what we can do with the kind of risk management product that we can provide for our users, and we tailor them specific to the different markets.
Very interesting. Can you maybe expand a little bit on, because Singapore is a very wealthy market, very high GDP per capita. The lending requirements perhaps are completely different from markets where we look at, for instance, Indonesia, or then again the Philippines. These are huge markets with hundreds, if not hundreds of millions of people. How is your, is there perhaps some sort of like a segmentation for individual retail customers in these markets that you can talk about a little bit? So for instance, how would you segment the market in the Philippines, or how would you segment the market in Indonesia?
Yeah, so I think it really depends on the market itself, first of all, right? So for example, in Philippines, what we are looking at is, of course, how do we identify them in terms of whether they are banked population, whether they are unbanked population, right? And then from there on, we can, deep dive into the different sub-segment that we can create for them. So another kind of example is we look at the age demographic, right? And we kind of like identify them on how we can, work on these different segments, because what they're looking for might be different. Let me give you an example, right? For example, any users at age of 18 and above are able to apply for Atome card, right? And the users from, let's say, 18 to 22, these are, strong resonance in terms of the student population, right? These are users who may have just graduated from school and they have not started work yet. And how are we going to work with them, right? By providing our financial products, right? We actually, go out there, maybe, for example, going to campus and sharing with them about financial literacy and how, Atome card, for example, can help them in terms of buying their expenditure. For example, they might need a laptop, right, for their university and their school, and how this Atome card can help them to actually manage their cash flow, right, in terms of installments, right, where they are able to buy things that they need for now, but yet at the same time make it affordable for them, right? And by sharing with all this, we try to also build kind of like a credit scoring for them so that they get more inclusive in the whole financial ecosystem, and over time they know how to manage their finance better, right? And that's how we grow with them from the start, right? When they're student graduating and start working across the different phase of their working journey. And of course, we have the other group where maybe the 25 to 35 segment, which is what we see the working population, right? And these are people who has very strong needs in terms of cash flow management, in terms of financial services, because they have more utilities that they need to pay, they need to buy necessities for their families, right? And how we can actually provide our product for them to manage their cash flow better, right? For them to able to, enjoy a bit more, right? By giving this kind of spending limit for them to kind of like stretch their budget a bit better, right? And at the same time, this segment, they have a different kind of, I would say, a user profile. And when we reach out to them, we go in with a different angle as well, right? Understanding their needs and craft a different message for them in terms of the campaigns that we have for them, right? That would be very different from the younger population, right? So that's where we, try to dive a bit deeper into the different sub-segments, always understanding what we want to see, the persona of this particular segment, and how we can reach out to them, resonate with them in terms of their needs and their wants. And that's where we come out with the solutions for them.
Very interesting. Talking about these segments, so particularly students or someone who is perhaps still in university and is about to graduate, and then their first steps in the world of work and credit and building up their own step by step their financial career, so to say. What I've observed in many Western countries as well as in China is among this Gen Z and this emerging generations of millennials as well, as we move forward, is this work fatigue, right? And so there's different names for it in different regions of the world, right? But what I have observed in Southeast Asia is that I don't really feel that this is the case. I don't know whether you have had the same experience, and perhaps it has something to do with the age pyramid and the still relatively high growth in the economies here in Southeast Asia. What are your thoughts about this? Do you feel that, especially when we're looking at students, that there is still a lot of very fast and quickly evolving market here, or what's your outlook on that?
Yeah, and that's quite an interesting question, right? And not revealing my age here as well. I'm not saying I'm old, but these are things that develop right across different generation, right? And I guess for every different generation, they have different things that resonate with them. And I do hear all these things about work fatigue, and I guess in terms of how people actually view it, first of all, right, the generations, what we call the Gen Z, the millennials, right? I'm not sure how to really identify or quantify them, right? But at the same time, what we see in these emerging markets is that we have to go into these markets with an open mind. Because why do I say that? Coming from Singapore, right, I can't use the mentality that I have or my understanding that I have of the Singapore demographic, right, to kind of like address the problem there in Philippines or Indonesia, for example. Because what we go through in terms of the phases, the kind of like society that we're living in is very different. And so when we approach these different markets, right, these different segments, like you say, this young generation, we have to go in with an open mind. We have to do our kind of local market research with the local people, and that's why we have focus group surveys to really understand, what they are looking for, right? I'm not sure whether work fatigue is something that, for example, in Philippines, is very in sync with them right now. But what I can see is that, from my understanding and based on my interactions with our users, this group of younger segment, they are very intrigued in terms of the financial services or financial products. Because I think what I have shared in terms of my experience as well, the last 10 years, the fintech industry has changed so much and has innovated so much from the last 10 years, right? Maybe over the last 50 years where cash is king, right? And you go into an economy right now where, for example, in China, like you mentioned, cash is almost non-existent anymore, right? And when we look at emerging markets, are they experiencing the same thing as well? What are their thoughts on, payments? What are their thoughts on financial services? It can be very different, right? From what I used to know, there are traditional banks, right? And from what they know, they don't know what's a traditional bank, maybe. All they are hearing is maybe digital banks, right? And that's where we find very interesting as well, because the mindset of these different segments is really, really different based on the kind of education that they receive, the kind of information that they perceive in the different landscape. And we really have to understand, right, from their perspective. And that's where we can make key strategies or kind of a key value proposition, like I always mentioned, on how to resonate with them. Because I think in fintech, right, we always have to make that kind of rapport with our users, right? Otherwise, in a very strong competitive environment in the fintech industry, if you don't listen to them, you do not keep in touch with them, you lose out of touch very fast. Yeah, and that's my key learning, right? Working with the different segments here.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I would like to move a little bit forward. Can you share some of the success stories that Atome has had so far when we're talking about specifically about improving financial literacy and inclusion? Something that doesn't have to be in the Philippines, perhaps in any other market that you have seen so far, where you see, wow, there we really perhaps made an impact or are on the way to making an impact.
Yeah, definitely. I think one key thing that I just want to share here is, when we look at data and we kind of like evaluate success story, I think the easiest way is we are always looking at quantified metrics, right? And I think one of them that we pay very close attention is our App Store rating, right? In Android, in iOS, For example, in Philippines, right, our App Store rating is 4.6 out of 5, with nearly 10,000 reviews. In other markets like Malaysia as well as Singapore, it's even higher at 4.9. And why do I mention all these numbers out there? Because this is a key metric that we evaluate our our relevance in terms of what we are providing to the market, to the users, right? Because if we get a low rating, right, there must be a reason. Conversely, if we get a high rating, there must be a reason as well. And on the qualitative side, we always review the comments our users give on the App Store on a weekly basis, right? This is to understand what we are lacking, what we are not doing so great, right? So that we always have room for improvement and to enhance them, so that we minimize all these kind of shortfall, so that we can always improve ourselves and make ourselves more available, accessible to our users, right? And during our customer group feedback session on Atome card, for example, in Philippines, our buy now pay later product, in Singapore, Malaysia, and Indonesia as well, a lot of people say that they love the concept of it, right? I think over the last 2-3 years, buy now pay later has been a very new concept. And what we can see that with the strong growth, right, there's a lot of support and a lot of pickup from the users to embrace this new concept. And particularly for the Atome buy now pay later card, right, a lot of users mentioned that most of them, this is their first ever card product, right? And it helped them to be able to shop so much more easier in terms of purchasing their daily necessities, shopping online, or going for a travel trip that they have been wanting to go so much after that, that 2 years of COVID break, right? And that's where we see, we really help them in terms of our financial product offerings. And in terms of, that's where I want to bring the whole thing to a whole ecosystem, right? It's all about that financial inclusion, because most often than not, what we see that the traditional financial products or the players out there, they might have always cater for the majority of the population out there, but there's always a segment that unfortunately do not have access to these kind of services. And that's where we try to come in to embrace that inclusion even further, right? So that they're able to, have access from the start, right? And see how they can build rapport and slowly grow together with us to more financial services, not just us, but, in the market, for example. And where we see that, a lot of people actually request that they would like to have a higher spending limit, because they see so much convenience, and so much relevance in terms of our financial offerings. But at the same time, we have to manage this very, very carefully, because we want to manage the balance between on how users manage, and learn about financial literacy along the way. And along the whole journey, we also educate our users in terms of how to manage their cash flow properly, how to make sure that they are able to do their repayments on a very responsible spending behavior, as well as right now, for example, we see a lot of scams, right? A lot of like fraud cases across the world. And what we are doing is to always reminding them on how do we identify these kind of problems, and to stay vigilant, right, on identifying all these fraud cases and protecting themselves. And that's where we always engage with them to make sure that we improve the financial literacy of everyone, of our demographic.
Yeah, when we're talking about financial inclusion in general, it looks, or basically the topic is, it is financial inclusion for as many people as possible. But what's usually not mentioned is that's financial inclusion selected by financial institutions under the prerequisite that the risk is being controlled, right? And I think that's something that is not often discussed, that this risk is basically a function of the availability of data on everyone, basically. So there's always this discussion that I don't think that we have openly enough in a society that it actually means only if you have data, then you have access to all these services, right? Or if you are willing to share that data. So I think what vastly needs to improve is first of all, the transparency and the standardization of how we are sharing data, so it does not become this black hole in which apparently your data disappears, right? And who knows who is having access to your data later on in the process, and that more users are convenient with transparently sharing their information. And then at the same time, what this transparency also means: who holds my data and what data are they holding, and how do I maintain control over my data with every single player? So is there any thought that you have on that process when we're talking about open data in a wider sense for Southeast Asia, to basically more enable this next step of make it available to me, available to everyone? I personally think that this is a very important step to take. Do you have also any ideas on that, or how you're moving this forward, this particular topic?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right to mention about this particular issue that or topic that's not really being thought about in general, right? In terms of our industry, or even to the users, right? To the end users. And what we also understand over the last few years, that we have seen a lot of cases in terms of how data is very important in all businesses to kind of like evaluate the customer profile, right? And also to evaluate our financial offerings for them. And I think first of all, we have to identify and recognize, right, the data plays a very important part in terms of what we do with our strategy and how we evaluate the risk management for our users. Particularly for Atome on our side, right? For every single transaction, right, when the users make, we underwrite every transactions. And that means that we have to very carefully kind of like manage the risk assessment part for the users. And in order to help us to manage all these evaluations and all this internal risk management, like what you mentioned, data is very important. And at the same time, data privacy is becoming a very big topic in terms of how users are able to consent, what kind of data they would like to share with us, in order for us to make proper assessment on how we can use this data to, safeguard them. That's very important, right? Data protection is very, very important in our market, and how we can actually use this data to kind of like help the users, right, to make more responsible kind of spending, right? And I think first of all, we must always keep that in mind, that all this data has to be user consented. And that's why, when we go out to the users, we always make sure that they understand what they're sharing in terms of the data they're sharing with us, in terms of data that, for example, we're going to Smile, right? When they access the Smile platform, what kind of data they are providing and sharing with the different parties. We make it very, very clear in terms of our privacy policy and terms and conditions, and we always provide them, a support email for them to write in to understand a bit more, that we can help to educate them as well. And when they consent this data to us, we have to make sure that we have the proper infrastructure, right, to safeguard this data, so that there's no leaks, there's no compromise on all this data. And we have to work very closely in terms with the local regulators, right? Our data compliance policy. How do we protect all this security of this user consented data, right? And at the end of the day, once we have all this in place, and this transparency or this rapport and relationship that we build with the users, we're building trust, right? That helps us both ways, right? It's a win-win situation from the users as well as the company perspective on how we can use this to kind of like grow together, right? Because we have to take small steps in order to maintain that trust and rapport, remember that. And then ultimately it translates to a better customer fit for our products and services. And we have to bear in mind that, we have to be a responsible spender as well as a responsible lender from the user side as well as Atome side. And sometimes we have to also decide that, when the financial product is not suitable for this particular user, we have to tell them upfront that, based on what we are seeing, right, we have to inform you that, this is not suitable for you. Sometimes we have to be the bad guy to say no, right? And after that, we can think of how we can work with the users to kind of like slowly build up their history, their credit history, and slowly that they can grow and to reach to a stage where they want to, right, by taking small steps at a time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also so that learning path on one side and that insistence on data protection and transparency. I personally, I don't just see it as a regulatory oversight, which you just have to comply with. I think it actually becomes more and more a USP, a business development aspect, right? Because the smart and educated users that you are describing as the Atome customers are exactly the group of customers that are expecting this transparency and this control about their own data, right? So I believe it becomes more a feature than a burden, to be honest. And especially when I'm, particularly the people in Europe, right, and where GDPR was born, where the whole wave of data protection was essentially, brought to the world. I think there I can feel this high alertness about sharing the data the strongest, but I also feel that this is evolving in other markets, and particularly in the Philippines. I can feel it, that there are a lot of people that are more and more aware of the safety of their information. And I feel this is a great way of using technology, not just the technology, but especially transparency, and especially proactive transparency, not just in line with the regulators, but perhaps one step ahead to show what is first possible and to find the balance, what is possible between financial enablement and on the other side also, having control over the data, right? So these things go hand in hand. But what I would like to understand is, all of that data, we're talking about data, how is it used at Atome, right? And obviously, I know the answer to that question, you know it as well, but perhaps for the audience, why is data so important when we're talking about risk? And perhaps how do you use data in, if you can share, right? I'm not asking for anything, because I know that this is for most of the fintechs and risk managers, this is a secret sauce, but maybe, the 30,000 feet overview of how is data being used for cards, for risk management, for underwriting, and then perhaps also how does it differ in your different markets in Southeast Asia?
Yeah, you're right. I believe in a lot of fintech, this will be the secret sauce, right? And I think that's something that is very fundamental in terms of how the business are being conducted, right? In order for us to have all these kind of like financial services and offerings for the users. And to be honest, even if I would like to share, I don't think I'm able to share because, I'm not in the risk department, right? So, of course, what I know is also from a very high level a perspective, right? From the operations side and also from the business development side, right? In order to understand how crucial this risk management is in terms of crafting the strategy as well as the financial product offerings for them. And I think what you mentioned about data, right? Why is it so important, right? And I would say it's even more important in terms for our product. Is because, as you can see, that a lot of our users that we are targeting, for example, these are unbanked segment, which means that in general, they do not really have a lot of financial data in the first place, right? And that's why a lot of financial banks or traditional banks, they are not able to serve them because of the lack of this kind of very fundamental information. They are not being able to provide for them. And so what we can use from a different perspective, that we come from a different angle, is that we can always start small, right? In terms of providing, for example, an Atome Buy Now Pay Later card, give them a small spending limit first for them to try out, right? And with all these different transaction data that we see from the users, where they are spending at, right? How often they are spending, right? And then we combine it with their repayment behavior. Are they able to repay on time? Are they able to, make their cash flow better, right? And slowly over the months where we start seeing all this kind of data that from different kind of users, right, demographic, and we kind of like formulate a kind of risk profile persona, right? This is where the data comes in as so important, because it helps tell us a story. It helps to tell us a projection, what's the probability of the users, you know, whether they are more likely to default, whether or not they are more likely to transact, right? And that kind of like make us better evaluate our strategy in terms of how we can serve these different users. And this is why it's so important, right? Because without this data, we are not able to, you know, come up with anything. We can't give them some product offering and expect them to be like any other users. That would be very detrimental in terms of our side as well, because we are not encouraging responsible spending, right? And that will create a lot of problems. And that's why we have to carefully manage this aspect. Without sufficient data or information, it's very hard for us to formulate any kind of strategy or kind of you know, a way that we can better serve these users.
Right. So it seems there always has to be like a first point. You can enrich it with data, but the first point is usually you give a little bit and then you start basically the conversation, right, to increase the credit limit over time. And so this is I think the common denominator also in different markets. That's what I hear from your answer. But that sounds very interesting. Is there perhaps, you know, when we're talking about employment information and in the context with Smile, so I've overseeing as well, you and I, in the last few months, the integration process, and we've been talking about employment data and all sorts of other data and data protection. Where do you see the space of employment data developing for the market in Southeast Asia, especially in the context of so many people being unbanked or underbanked? Does it really have the power to basically augment all of the existing data, and what role does it play for you at Atome?
Yeah, I think, you know, just bring back to the point that you mentioned just now, right? Data is very important, right? I think in terms of any kind of data, it always helps to provide more information about the user, right? So that we can kind of like provide the framework in terms of how we can evaluate them. And particularly one of the key data that we're looking for, you know, over the last few months when we do the integration, we're looking at employment data, which is a very fundamental premise source of indicator, right, in terms of how we evaluate the user kind of ability to pay, right, and how we can evaluate their spending limit, right? This is very, very important. And on top of that, you know, as long as the user provide us with more access in terms of user consented data, not just employment data, right? It can be other kind of financial kind of like credit history. With more such data, they can always give us, and we can provide more evaluation, right, with all these kind of different metrics that we have internally to form that algorithm, right, that internal risk assessment. So with our technology, the more data that we have, the more robust our risk assessment will be. And that's why it's so important for us to work together with a platform like Smile, where you can help us, right, to kind of like bring the user into the different platforms that they have, the different kind of like employment data, right? And they share with us so that we can make further enhancement, further assessment of their risk profile, right? So I think that is very, very important in terms of how we assess and make sure that the process is as robust as possible, and to make sure that it's reliable and responsible for the users.
Great. In the past, there's been a lot of talk, not necessarily so much in Southeast Asia, but as well in Southeast Asia. And I think especially the conversation with regulators has been largely driven by a group of fintech players, where Atome played a very strong role in proactively regulating buy now, pay later. what is your perspective, especially also considering what has been happening with buy now pay later in the US and Europe and in Australia? There's been a huge up and down, and how do you see it in, the regulatory aspect and also the business aspect in these two regions?
Yeah, so I believe, in terms of the outlook, right? There's always a very, very big topic about compliance and regulator, right? Especially in fintech, because why is that so, right? Because fintech is always about innovation. Innovation is something new and something the market has not ever seen before, and that's why this is something that has to be very carefully considered from the regulator's perspective as well as from the business perspective, right? Because what we want at the end of the day is always helping the market, the landscape, the users to grow, but at the same time be very conscious that it has to have the welfare and to protect the users at all costs, right? And that's why we always have this kind of dialogues, like you mentioned very rightfully. In Singapore, Atome actually worked very closely with the local regulator, MAS, to write the code of conduct of buy now pay later, right? And I think in Europe, like you mentioned, or even in the US, right, where the whole concept of buy now pay later is so new, that the local regulators normally comes down together with the fintech together and to kind of like understand what has to be done, right? Or rather, what framework it has to have in order to make sure that the whole fintech landscape works, smoothly as well safely in the interest of the user. And from the Atome's perspective, we have a regional compliance team because, we work in different markets, right? Like Singapore, Malaysia, Philippines, Indonesia, right? We have a regional compliance team that engages in healthy, regular dialogues with the regulators in all the markets we operate in. And what I can see for myself in terms of the shift, right, over the last few years, right, where it used to be a very one-sided approach where regulators kind of like tell you the framework, the guideline on what to do and what not to do. But I think in today's current market, it is more collaborative, more 360, where the fintech businesses like ourselves, Atome, we kind of like work so closely with the regulators. We also provide our certain inputs, certain insights that we view, right? And we share all these kind of information with the regulators to help them to understand, right, what we are trying to do, what we are trying to better achieve for the users, and help them to understand that, with the big picture, what it can help with the economy in terms of the landscape, in terms of the fintech industry, how we can help the users. And then together, right, it's a two-way street that we come together and formulate a framework, a guideline, so that we can benefit the market, the users, the fintech players, right? And I think in general, what I can see that the regulators here are very collaborative and very understanding as well, right? How it's important to have innovation as well, at the same time to have digital transformation. These two agendas going close hand to hand, right? To ensure that consumers are always well protected and always have the best kind of access to the fintech innovations that we are able to provide. And so from that perspective, I think regulators, fintech, we always have a very strong relationship, right? Working very closely together, and that's how we come about in the different markets in Singapore, in Philippines. It is how it is.
Yeah, it's a great achievement to see that shift in communication. It has been a little bit more top down, as you described, and then gradually over time, because the innovation is just moving forward in such a staggering speed that it actually requires that kind of regulation. To have the regulator come and ask you is like, how would we do that, and what are the problems, and how would you address that, and then to be more in a dialogue instead of in some sort of like a protocol that says we decide how it's done and you have to implement it, which seems to me a lot less productive and efficient, and a lot less beneficial for the end users as well. Perhaps my last question for you would be, where do you see Atome, and perhaps something like a lofty aspiration for the future? What was it going to be in 5 years?
Yeah, I think, you know, I'm very optimistic as well, just from a personal perspective, where Atome is able to, you know, really have a better outreach in terms of the target segment that we are hoping to achieve. So first of all, you know, definitely to more markets, right? And also to more users in terms of our financial product offerings, right? Back to our mission statement, is very crystal clear from day one that we are trying to make our offerings, our financial products, services more available to our users, and they have more access in terms of, you know, financial inclusion, the tremendous opportunities that we are seeing in the different markets of the new population, right? This kind of like young, digital savvy, mobile first population, and that's where we are trying to reach out to them and to grow from them from the start, and hopefully, you know, to the many years ahead where we can, you know, work very closely, understand each other very well, come up with new, different, innovative kind of like services that we can provide them. And you can see that, you know, like Atome, we started with a BNPL product, right? And then we evolved into a BNPL card, right, where users are able to spend, right, their Atome card at more merchants, from a closed loop to an open loop concept, right? That's increasing the accessibility for our users, right? And we are always having that in mind. So from a services standpoint, we have evolved, and we are always continuously challenging ourselves. What's the next innovation? What's the next best step that we can engage with our users, right? And that's the kind of mindset that we are always trying to have, you know, from a startup, from a fintech kind of a perspective. And you know, coming out with the different kind of products, right? I think that's very important. And what is very, very promising as well is that we have seen our products have been very well received at this moment. And that is something that we see, you know, it's very heartwarming to see that there's a good relevance there, right? And I'm very happy also that, you know, we are working with Smile to actually create that whole ecosystem, right? So that we are able to serve them better. And I think in the future, you know, we are able to offer more different types of financial products and services, such as savings and insurance next time. So, you know, this is a very interesting space, and we always want to see how we can evolve through technology, through innovation, into a more real kind of consumer-facing fintech app for our users.
Amazing. Yeah, I'm very much looking forward to see more from Atome and to hear more from you and that cooperation. Thank you very much, Xavier. It's been a blast. It's been a fantastic conversation, and I'm looking forward to touch base with you again.
Yes, thank you so much, Jerome.